Hey guys, tonight we're sliding under the mothball-scented sheets of a Victorian bedroom, a broken bar, but don't get too excited. The room is dimly lit by a sputtering gas lamp. The wallpaper might be laced with arsenic, trendy, and the bed, well, the bed is definitely judging you. As you sit down, you notice something unsettling. Your knees are up near your chin. You try to lie back, but your feet dangle off the end like some sort of sleepy scarecrow. Welcome to the world of the unreasonably short Victorian bed. At first glance, it doesn't make sense. Victorians weren't that much shorter than we are. Sure, the average height was a bit less, maybe around 5'6" for men, give or take, but not tiny. So why did they build beds like they were for oversized toddlers with trust funds? You might think, maybe they just didn't care about comfort. But oh, dear listener, Victorians cared deeply about appearances, manners, and the illusion of perfect moral rectitude. And their beds, oddly enough, were right in the thick of all that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a creaky wooden floor, the faded rug curling at the edges, and peer at a Victorian bed. Mahogany, card posts, immaculately tucked coverlets. But the frame? It looks like it belongs to someone who's permanently curled up like a shrimp. This wasn't a one-off mistake by a lazy carpenter. Short beds were everywhere. Inns, manor houses, even royal palaces. It was as if people collectively decided, yes, let's all sleep in fetal position until further notice. Some theories suggest practicality. Maybe people didn't need to lie flat. Maybe everyone had sore backs. Or maybe, just maybe, broken bar. It was fashion, morality, and a pinch of paranoia all rolled into one goose feather stuffed mattress. There's something strangely dignified about how these beds look. Neat, symmetrical, proper, which fits. Because Victorian life revolved around being seen as respectably even while unconscious. Some historians suggest that shorter beds were made intentionally to encourage sleeping in a slightly upright position, not sitting up exactly, but elevated up, propped by pillows and bolsters. Why? Because reclining too flat was seen as something a broken bar, undignified, potentially dangerous, or worse, lazy. You imagine your great-great-grandmother whispering, "Only the dead lie flat," and that wasn't just a figure of speech. Victorian death rituals often involved laying corpses out completely flat on display, in the parlor, under crisp white sheets and floral arrangements. So, in a way, lying flat became associated with death. Upright sleeping, by contrast, meant you were alive, moral, and just tired enough to still be virtuous. Strange, isn't it? The idea that your sleeping position might say something about your character. Yet in the Victorian age, even unconsciousness wasn't free from scrutiny. Add to this the cold. Victorian homes weren't exactly toasty. Bedrooms were often chilly, drafty affairs with fireplaces that were mostly decorative. Tucking into a tiny bed with your knees bent and your body curled under heavy layers helped conserve heat. Think of it like being a human cinnamon roll, efficient, cozy, slightly sad. Let's not forget that many of these beds were designed before the widespread use of central heating. You didn't have the luxury of sprawling out like a starfish. The shorter the bed, the easier it was to warm with your own body heat, and maybe a very annoyed cat. But still, something doesn't add up. After all, people in colder regions, Scandinavians, for instance, had long beds even before radiators were a thing. So, was it really about warmth? Historians still argue whether bed size was primarily driven by medical beliefs, heating efficiency, furniture trends, or plain old design aesthetics. Some even suggest that shorter beds were a side effect of ornate bedposts and elaborate headboards, of features that took up extra room without adding any functional sleeping space. Let's pause to appreciate one overlooked detail. Many beds were technically extendable. That's right, some had footboards that could be adjusted or removed. Others had clever carpentry tricks to make them more adaptable. But these features were often reserved for wealthier households. If you were a working-class Londoner sleeping above a bakery, you were more likely curled in a wooden box with a wool blanket and a prayer. Now, before you blame Victorians too harshly for their questionable furniture choices, consider this: their focus wasn't just on sleep, it was on sleep as a moral act. Being tidy, modest, upright, even Unreasonably was seen as a virtue. You didn't slouch into dreams, you folded yourself politely into them, as if sleep were a formal dinner. And besides, they had bigger things to worry about, like cholera, and coal smog, and making sure your corset didn't suffocate you before you hit the pillow. So here you are, knees bent, shoulders supported by embroidered pillows, the wallpaper whispering questionable toxins, and the gas lamp hissing softly. It's bedtime. Victorian style. Sweet dreams if you can find the legroom. You shift in your imaginary Victorian bed again gingerly, so as not to bump your head on the ornate headboard carved with angels who are either comforting or judging you. Still, the question lingers: why this half-sitting, half-lying position? Let's dive into the second leading theory: posture. Victorians were absolutely obsessed with posture, not just at the dinner table, but everywhere. In portraits, in promenades, and yes, even in bed. A straight spine wasn't just a mark of physical health, it was tied to one's moral fiber. Slouching was considered vulgar, and if you slouched in bed, well, that was practically a slippery slope toward moral decay. The idea of sleeping upright or semi-upright had its roots in both religious and medical reasoning. Many believed that elevating the head and chest while sleeping improved circulation, aided digestion, and helped prevent the kind of nighttime disasters that would make for a very unladylike death. One particularly dramatic fear was that lying flat allowed vapors to rise from the stomach to the brain, a phrase that tells you just how wildly imaginative Victorian medicine could be. So, many people propped themselves up with a veritable rampart of bolsters, cushions, and wedge pillows. Some even tied themselves into certain positions with cloths or belts to maintain their correct sleep posture. There's even a bizarre anecdote about upper-class ladies using posture pillows filled with dried lavender and buckwheat husks, arranged just so beneath the shoulder blades to keep the chest open and proud. Of course, these same ladies were often expected to maintain that position with the help of a night corset, which, let's face it, sounds like the opposite of relaxing. But the upright position wasn't just for elegance or digestion, it was also about modesty. See, lying flat was considered a little broken bar intimate, a little too vulnerable, too exposed. It hinted at idleness, indulgence, or worse, sleeping in past 7 a.m., which, for a Victorian, might as well be high treason. Some etiquette guides of the time even advised that ladies should rise and dress before any servant might see them in bed, suggesting that the appearance of their sleeping posture was, yes, another performance. It didn't stop at bustles and bonnets, it continued under candlelight and chenille blankets. Even the design of the bed encouraged upright sleeping. High headboards helped prop you up, and low footboards kept the covers neat and tight. Some beds were designed with a slope lower at the feet than at the head, like a wooden ski ramp for insomniacs. You imagine yourself now, cinched in place, a pillow under each arm, a lace nightcap on your head, trying not to drool in your sleep because it would ruin the embroidery. This isn't sleep, it's a full-body theater performance. And you're only the star if you don't roll over. Historians still debate whether most Victorians actually slept upright or whether this was a habit limited to the upper classes and the health-obsessed. Diaries and letters from the period are frustratingly vague, as people often assumed the details of their sleep were too obvious to mention or too private. Of course, it's worth noting that many medical manuals of the time prescribed semi-reclining sleep positions for those suffering from all manner of ailments, asthma, heart problems, snoring, and even anxiety. So, it wasn't all about appearances. Some people were genuinely trying to breathe a little easier. Then again, some were just mimicking Queen Victoria. That's right, Her Majesty herself was said to sleep in a bed that encouraged slightly elevated posture, and the rest of the empire, always eager to imitate the Queen's habits, except the part where she mourned her husband for 40 years, followed suit. And there's one more layer: nighttime reading. With the rise of literacy in the 19th century, more people were reading in bed. If you're going to spend your last waking hour paging through moral tales or etiquette manuals, it helps to be sitting up. This habit eventually led to the invention of the beddeska, a kind of adjustable tray that you'd place on your lap to hold your candle-lit novel. Think of it as the Victorian iPad stand, except it might catch fire. By now, your imaginary Victorian bed is starting to feel more like a rigid study nook than a place of rest. You've got your back ramrod straight, your book propped before you, and your hot water bottle tucked at your feet, and you're still wondering how any of this is supposed to be relaxing. But the answer is, it wasn't. Not really. Victorian sleep wasn't about luxury or deep REM cycles. It was about duty, decorum, and not embarrassing yourself in your dreams. So tonight, as you nestle deeper into the tale, just be glad your bed lets you stretch your legs, and maybe even just out of solidarity with the Victorians, try sleeping with a book on your chest and a pillow behind your spine. Who knows, you might unlock a new level of historical alignment. Just a broken bar. Don't blame me if you wake up sore. You're still propped up in that impossibly elegant, unreasonably short Victorian bed, and while the pillows are trying their best, your lower back is beginning to file a formal complaint. But before you toss and turn, let's consider one of the most influential if grima reasons Victorians slept the way they did: tuberculosis. It's not the cheeriest bedtime story, but bear with me. Victorian England had a deeply complicated relationship with illness, and tuberculosis, then called consumption, was basically the poster child of tragic, poetic suffering. Think pale cheeks, gentle coughing into embroidered handkerchiefs, and lots of sighing while staring wistfully out of windows. It was everywhere. One of the deadliest diseases of the era, tuberculosis claimed hundreds of thousands of lives in the 19th century. It was unpredictable, lingering, and deeply misunderstood, and for some baffling reason, it also became weirdly romanticized. Poets, painters, and novelists portrayed the consumptive look as ethereal. Being sick made you more interesting. It also made you adjust how you lived and how you slept. Doctors of the time believed that posture could make or break your lungs. Since tuberculosis was a disease of the respiratory system, breathing clearly during the night became a full-time strategy. Upright sleeping was encouraged not just for comfort but to fight off death itself. Imagine your average Londoner, already gasping from coal smoke and smog, trying to sleep flat. Not ideal. Instead, they layered up with pillows. Beds were shortened not necessarily to force you upright but to accommodate it. You didn't need a long bed if you weren't planning on stretching out, and if you tried, good luck coughing politely while lying on your back. But tuberculosis wasn't just a health issue, it shaped the very aesthetic of the Victorian era. Thinness became fashionable, delicate frames, pale skin, and sunken eyes were the beauty standards of the day, largely because they mirrored the visible signs of consumption. Even furniture wasn't immune. Beds were made daintier, more decorative, more ladylike. Function quietly took a back seat to forma and fear. Historians still debate whether bed lengths actually shortened because of tuberculosis, or whether the disease simply helped reinforce the upright sleeping trend that was already happening. It's the chicken or feather-filled pillow dilemma. You imagine a Victorian mother tucking her child into bed, carefully propping him up with a bolster, adjusting the angle of his back, muttering a prayer that his cough didn't mean anything serious. The bed becomes less a place of rest and more a battleground for fragile health, a fortress of quilts and hope. There's even evidence that hospitals and sanatoriums began designing beds specifically to keep patients inclined at certain angles. Adjustable headboards, sloped mattresses, and reclining frames became precursors to modern hospital beds. The designs eventually trickled down to wealthier households, and from there, to middle-class imitators. And let's not forget the windows. Fresh air was considered essential in treating consumption. Open windows, cross breezes, night air. It all sounds romantic until you realize this meant many Victorians slept in cold, drafty rooms with wide open panes even in winter. So what do? You make the bed smaller, you curl up, you tuck in, you turn your bed into a cocoon of safety against the healing frost. But again, not everyone agreed. Some doctors believed in the open-air cure, while others thought exposure to the night air was a one-way ticket to the grave. Some believed lying flat encouraged restful breathing, while others were convinced it pulled fluid in the lungs. Sleep hygiene, it turns out, was just as controversial then as it is now. There were also a broken bar less medical theories. Some people thought tuberculosis was caused by excessive reading, or tight corsets, or moral weakness. One preacher claimed that nighttime sinfulness weakened the constitution and invited the wasting disease. Tough crowd. Even the bedding was suspect. Mattresses stuffed with straw, feathers, or horsehair could hold moisture, they thought, was dangerous. A damp bed might literally kill you. So people began drying their mattresses in the sun, beating them with sticks, rotating them. In some cases, entire beds were dragged into the garden during the day and brought back in by nightfall, like overachieving sunflowers. And yet, people still tried to look stylish while doing it. Quilts were embroidered with initials, coverlets featured lace and fringe, beds had canopies and tassels and, yes, even tiny curtains to block the deathly breeze. It was a strange balance: survive the night, but look fabulous doing it. By now, you're probably picturing yourself in one of these beds, trying to sleep bolt upright, clutching a hot water bottle and hoping you don't cough. But you're also surrounded by embroidered cushions, candlelight, and the faint scent of lavender. It's odd, it's beautiful, it's slightly terrifying. Still, the shortness of the bed makes a strange kind of sense now. It wasn't built for you to lie down, it was built to protect you, from disease, from drafts, from death by decorum, and maybe from yourself, too. You're beginning to get used to your Victorian sleeping position, elbows tucked in, knees slightly bent, back propped just enough to suggest either high moral standing or the early stages of a lung condition. But now you start to notice something else entirely: the sheer amount of effort that went into looking effortlessly tucked in. Because sleeping, in the Victorian age, wasn't just about sleeping. It was about maintaining an entire presentation, even when no one but your chambermaid or your cat was likely to witness it. Let's talk about hair, specifically, the towering hairstyles of fashionable Victorian women: buns, braids, and ringlets so complex they probably had their own mailing addresses. Once styled, these hairdos weren't something you casually mashed into a pillow. That would be a waste of a 2-hour grooming session and half a bottle of lavender pomade. Instead, many women chose to sleep in ways that protected their hairdo. That meant sleeping on their sides or even upright, necks perched on oddly firm pillows or padded headdresses. Some wore what were called night bonnets, and not the cute kind you'd see in a costume drama, but structured little contraptions designed to keep curls in place, reduce frizz, and preserve the illusion of daytime perfection. Some were even laced tightly beneath the chin. Picture a very determined pastry wrapped in ribbon. And these bonnets weren't optional. either. Proper Victorian etiquette books insisted that a lady should never be seen in bed without one. Your scalp must remain decent at all times, apparently. So, on top of your bolsters, your rigid posture, and your mortal fear of drafts, you also had to secure your scalp like it was national treasure. Now, toss in the nightgown, or should I say night ensemble. These weren't your modern oversized t-shirts and cozy socks. No, Victorian nightwear involved layers, long cotton gowns, lace collars, petticoats, and occasionally a bedroom corsets, because even while unconscious, one should maintain a refined silhouette. It's as if they feared their dreams might include a surprise ball. Historians still argue whether these elaborate sleep outfits were a daily reality or reserved for special occasions like being ill, entertaining overnight guests, or posing for melancholic bedtime portraits. Yes, those were a thing, but diaries from the era suggest that at least for the upper and middle classes, there was a genuine effort to go to bed looking like a porcelain figurine who had just fainted in a drawing room. And that affects the bed itself. You didn't want your delicate lace collar or your pomaded hair to get crushed by too much horizontal sprawl. So again, people slept more upright, more compact, and as a result, the bed didn't need to be as long. You weren't flopping around like a salmon in sweatpants. You were elegantly perched, hands folded, hair intact, prepared at any moment for a Victorian novelist to write you into a scene. Even the pillows got involved. Many were embroidered with initials, quotes, or Bible verses, because naturally you needed a little spiritual encouragement between coughing fits and adjusting your corset. Others were stiff, flat, and oddly square-eyed, designed not for comfort, but for control. Your head went here, your hair stayed there, and your dignity stayed everywhere. And speaking of bonnets, we can't forget their male counterparts. Men had their own nightcaps along, drooping cloth hats that were part warmth, part modesty, and possibly part magician costume. These were practical, sure, but also contributed to that very specific Victorian bedtime look, a look that probably wouldn't survive a TikTok trend, but certainly made its mark in lithographs. One peculiar little tidbit: some elite families went so far as to have matching bedclothes, pillows, nightcaps, even chamber pots, all done in coordinating fabric, because what's the point of sleeping upright in a 4-foot bed if your linens clash with your drapes? You may be wondering, did people really live like this, or is this just a caricature of the fussy upper class? And the answer is, kind of both. While working-class people had much simpler setups, often just a straw mattress and whatever fabric scraps they could stitch into a blanket, of the aspirational classes loved to copy the elite. So, even if your house was small, your nightgown might still have lace, your bed frame might still have carvings, and your sleep might still be shortened not by the size of the room but by the effort of being fashionable inside it. It's a lot, isn't it? Imagine ending your long day of proper posture, meat pies, and passive-aggressive tea parties by undressing into multiple layers of sleepwear, winding your hair into a night-preserving contraption, tucking into a decorative but undersized bed, and carefully arranging yourself into a modestly upright sleeping pose in a broken bar, only to be awoken 3 hours later by the cold, the clatter of a coal cart, or the haunting creak of arsenic-laced wallpaper trying to kill you in your sleep. All that effort, for maybe 5 hours of disrupted, decorative sleep. So as you lie there now, in your thoroughly modern, mercifully full-length bed, you can smile at the absurdity. Your hair can be a mess, your legs can stretch out, and your pillow doesn't need a Bible verse embroidered on it, unless, of course, you'd like one. You're now thoroughly wrapped in imagined lace, propped on a slightly judgmental pillow, and wondering how anyone actually rested in these overly decorated shoeboxes called beds. But before we get too carried away with the upper class's fuss and feathers, it's time to descend quite literally below stairs. Because not all Victorian beds were carved mahogany thrones. In fact, most weren't. So let's take a midnight stroll down a creaking servant's stairwell and peer into the cramped world of Victorian working-class sleep. You reach a narrow door. Inside is a windowless room the size of a modern-day walk-in closet. A single iron-frame bed leans against one wall, its thin mattress sagging in the middle like a hammock that's given up. A faded blanket lies folded at the foot. There's a single pillow, no tassels, no embroidered quotes, and no extra room. This, dear listener, is a servant's bed, for the cooks, maids, and stable boys of Victorian England. Beds weren't just shorter, they were brutally efficient. Your feet didn't dangle because of design whimsy, they dangled because there was no room to stretch. Every inch of space in these servant quarters was calculated. If you could breathe and sleep, it was considered adequate. Bonus points if your bed didn't share a wall with the noisy scullery pipes. And often, you weren't alone. In many households, servants doubled or tripled up in a single room. Privacy was a luxury, and comfort a distant rumor. If the family upstairs slept upright for appearances, you slept upright because your bunkmate's knee was occupying your personal rectangle of space. Historians still argue whether most servants chose to curl up, or whether they were simply adapting to impossibly tight quarters. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, a blend of necessity, fatigue, and the slow erosion of spine flexibility. But it wasn't just the spatial economy. Short beds below stairs also reflected the class hierarchy of sleep itself. The length of your bed was, quite literally, a measurement of your social worth. Think about it. If the master of the house had a grand, high bed with turned posts and engraved initials, the servant's bed was barely more than a coda, often pushed beneath staircases or into storage nooks. In some grand estates, servants even slept inside furniture, fold-out compartments, drawer beds, or beneath large tables in the kitchen. If you've ever curled up on a friend's couch and tried to avoid the coffee table leg pressing into your ribs, you were halfway there. And then there were the children, not just the master's children, but the working-class kids, many of whom shared beds with siblings. Entire families might sleep in a single room. Beds, if you were lucky enough to have one, were often handmade shorter by necessity, using leftover wood, rope, or even crates. One charming but slightly horrifying tidbit: in some homes, younger kids slept at the foot of their parents' or older siblings' beds, perpendicular to the rest of the body, curled up like obedient cats. Economical, yes. Comfortable, not even a little. Now, don't let your imagination turn all Dickensian just yet. While poverty was real and widespread, not all working-class beds were disasters. Some families took great pride in their modest rooms, hanging curtains to create privacy, embroidering pillowcases when they could, or warming bricks to place beneath the blankets on cold nights. Still, the emphasis was always on space saving, and that meant smaller, tighter, shorter beds. A fun but slightly eerie custom in some rural areas was the settle-bed, a wooden bench by day that folded out into a cramped bed by night. They were usually placed near the hearth, meaning you could drift off to sleep with the fire crackling a few feet away. Cozy, yes. But if you were tall, you were probably dreaming with your knees up and your toes flirting with the coals. You picture yourself there now, squeezed between two siblings, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of potatoes, one arm tucked under a lumpy straw pillow, the other fending off the occasional draft that snakes through the floorboards. And yet a broken bar, there's something intimate about it, human, shared. Unlike the showy restraint of the upper class, working-class sleep was more functional, but no less ritualistic. There was a rhythm to it, a hum of exhaustion, shared blankets, whispered end-of-day stories, and the knowledge that tomorrow would arrive far too soon. The contrast between upstairs and downstairs could not be more stark. One bed boasted turned wood and tassels, the other, an iron frame and the occasional mouse, but they had one thing in common: neither was quite long enough for the person sleeping in it. Maybe that's the great Victorian joke, yeah, the illusion of control, elegance, and design, all wrapped around a basic truth: sometimes you just need more legroom. So the next time you kick your foot out from under the duvet in a modern queen-size bed, think of those curled-up maids and fire-warmed brick sleepers. They might not have had much, but they still managed to dream. You've now curled up in the bedchambers of nobles and crouched under the eaves with the servant class. But let's take a moment to admire the actual bed frames themselves, the grand, gaudy, and sometimes entirely impractical centerpieces of Victorian bedrooms. Because while you've already guessed these beds were short, what you might not expect is that they were also massive. Not in length, of course, no, that would be far too convenient. Instead, Victorian beds were tall, bulky, and often weighed as much as a small horse. Picture towering headboards, ornate carvings of angels, lions, vines, and mythical beasts. Now pair that with the tiniest sleep surface imaginable. Congratulations, you've just mentally assembled a Victorian bed. The logic behind these monstrosities is as twisted as the bedposts themselves. In true Victorian fashion, form often came before function. A bed wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a statement, a physical representation of wealth, taste, and one's place in the social hierarchy. In fact, beds were often the most expensive piece of furniture in the house, even more than the dining table or wardrobe. And much like Instagram influencers today arranging a bookshelf with carefully curated accidental mess, Victorians styled their beds with a particular aesthetic: elaborate, luxurious, and sometimes completely unusable. You'd think a person designing a place to rest would value simplicity, but these beds were monuments to drama. Let's start with the headboard. Victorian headboards weren't just decorative, they were practically architectural. Some reached over 5 feet tall, built from dark woods like mahogany, walnut, or oak. The carvings were often symbolic: grapes and vines for fertility, cherubs for innocence, roses for romance, and acanthus leaves for a broken bar well, showing off. But here's the twist: the larger and more detailed the headboard, the less space there was for the sleeper. Some frames even curved inward at the top, as if the wood itself was gently reminding you to stay in your designated box and not stretch your unworthy limbs. Historians still argue whether the ornateness of these beds was partly to disguise their impracticality. After all, if a guest walked into your room and saw a 400-pound headboard glistening with shellac and gold inlay, they were less likely to ask, "But why can't I lie flat?" Then there's the canopy. The canopy, romantic, drapey, and also a magnet for dust and spiders. Some were sheer muslin, others thick velvet. In grander homes, the canopy was so extensive it created a kind of indoor tent, like sleeping in a fashionable forest glade, if that glade was full of coughing and moral anxiety. These canopies were rarely functional. They didn't keep out the cold, they didn't improve airflow, but they looked excellent, and for Victorians, that was enough. Let's talk about the footboard, too, often just as elaborate as the headboard. These were solid, rigid, and sometimes curved inward, and while they certainly anchored the bed's look, they also ensured that if you did try to stretch out in your sleep, your toes would meet with an angry slab of wood. It's almost as if the beds were designed to say, "That's far enough." Of course, not all design choices were purely aesthetic. Victorian bedrooms were often multifunctional spaces, places where people dressed, prayed, nursed the sick, even received visitors. That's right, it wasn't unusual to entertain someone from bed, so your bed needed to project an image: stability, respectability, a sense that you had your life together even if you were horizontal for most of it. That meant polish, craftsmanship, and embellishment. But ironically, it also meant sacrificing basic comfort. No adjustable bases, no minimalist designs, just heavy furniture and high expectations. Fun fact, some beds were designed with secret compartments. Yes, of Victorian furniture makers, perhaps frustrated by the lack of legroom, compensated with creativity. Hidden drawers for letters, lock boxes for jewelry, even tiny cubbies for books or nightcaps. It's as if your bed was also a vault, a desk, and a fashion show rolled into one. And for the wealthiest households, the bed wasn't just furniture, it was a legacy, handed down through generations. These beds often retain their original dimensions. So if great-grandfather slept curled like a croissant in 1810, you were expected to do the same in 1895, whether you'd grown or not. Now imagine inheriting a majestic but cramped antique bed and being told, "This is where your ancestors slept. Show some respect, and tuck your knees in." One fringe theory even suggests that some beds started as appropriately long, but were retrofitted into smaller rooms or altered during house moves. The process of transportation or room reshaping may have led to trimming the bedposts or even the framed sofa like a poorly planned haircut. But again, historians can't agree. It's an ongoing debate in the quiet, dusty halls of antique furniture academia. Now, back in your imaginary room, you look around. Everywhere you turn, floral carvings, velvet swags, gleaming wood. The room glows with candlelight and the soft rustle of silk. It's beautiful, it's excessive, it's wildly inconvenient, and yet a broken bar, it has a kind of charm, a kind of restful absurdity. You start to understand. For the Victorians, the bed wasn't just for sleep, it was for display, for ritual, for proving to yourself and the world that even in rest, you were composed, elegant, and morally upright, literally. So you settle in, marveling at the paradox. A grand bed that leaves no room for your legs. You're still nestled into that over-ornate Victorian bed, knees politely bent, feet nudging the footboard like they're trying to start a conversation. But tonight, sleep isn't just about comfort or posture. No. Now you're about to be introduced to the ritual of sleep, because for the Victorian upper class, bedtime was not a hasty tumble into the sheets, it was an event, a ceremony, a moral and physical wind-down performed with the dedication of a monk preparing for Vespers. Let's begin with the pre-sleep beverage. You might expect a cup of herbal tea, but many Victorians, especially those with titles and furniture that weighed more than a carriage, preferred a glass of brandy, or sherry, or even a fortified wine with a name you'd mispronounce at a fancy dinner. This nightcap wasn't just a treat, it was a prescribed part of winding down. Doctors of the time even recommended it. For the nerves, they'd say, ignoring the fact that alcohol probably kept more people wide-eyed than not. You sip your imaginary brandy and glance at the little table beside your bed. It's cluttered with what could only be described as sleep accessories. A porcelain water jug, perhaps some smelling salts in case you felt faint, a common hobby, and a tiny silver bell to summon your maida because heaven forbid you fetch your own hot water bottle. Now comes the prayer stool. That's right, before slipping under the lace-draped covers, a proper Victorian often knelt beside the bed for nightly prayers. Even if your joints ached, even if your corset had carved your ribcage into a decorative bowl, the prayer was non-negotiable. And some families took it further, singing hymns, reading from moral handbooks, or sharing edifying stories to promote dreams filled with virtue and restraint. Not exactly Netflix and chill, but you get the idea. Then finally you'd climb into bed, not without assistance. Of course, these beds were high, really high, like, you might need a footstool high, and that footstool might be hand-carved and velvet cushioned, because this was, after all, a ritual of refinement. Climbing into bed without knocking over a candlestick or displacing your bonnet required the grace of a ballet dancer and the patience of someone who's never worn sweatpants. Once in bed, the covers were tucked in so tightly you'd wonder if sleep was even allowed. There was a very specific Victorian anxiety about being properly enveloped. Loose sheets were sloppy, scandalous, possibly dangerous. Many people slept beneath multiple layers: a sheet, a counterpane, a heavy woolen blanket, and a quilt, each perfectly aligned, each folded with precision. But the main event, that was the positioning. Remember, lying flat was still suspicious. So you'd elevate your back with one bolster, your knees with another. Some people even placed small pillows under their wrists to ensure a restful alignment, or used special neck rolls to maintain posture and prevent the ever-dreaded double chin upon waking. Imagine going to bed not to rest your mind, but to preserve your chin. Historians still argue whether these elaborate sleep rituals were purely practical or more about social signaling. Was it about comfort, or were people just so used to performing all day that they didn't know how to stop? Here's a fringe tidbit for you. In some aristocratic households, people timed their sleep around astrological charts. Yes, bedtime could be dictated by the stars. Mars is in Leo. Dear, best to avoid dreams tonight. Whether this was sincere belief or just another excuse to show off one's intellectual hobbies is unclear, but it certainly added flair to the evening wind down. And speaking of flair, the boudoir itself often reflected this theatricality. Curtains were drawn in not just to block the cold, but to create a chamber within the chamber, as one etiquette guide put it. Candles were extinguished slowly, in a specific order, with the final one snuffed just as the head settled back against the pillow, a kind of symbolic descent into dreams. But don't get too cozy, you might not be done yet. In some homes, a servant would perform a final bed check, ensuring the fire was out, the windows cracked just so, and the chamber pot was within reach. And yes, they might even adjust your blankets, as if you were a particularly moody roast chicken. All of this reinforced the idea that bedtime wasn't a private affair, it was a household endeavor. You lie there now, blanketed, bolstered, bonneted, and possibly buzzed from your brandy. The room is silent except for the faint ticking of a mantel clock and the distant clink of someone's tea tray being cleared downstairs. Your eyelids droop, but your spine remains respectfully straight. You've done it, you've completed the ritual, and perhaps, just perhaps, you understand why they did it. Life was uncertain. Illness, reputation, scandal all lurked just beyond the door, but in this carefully arranged bed, under starched linens and within the soft glow of ritual, there was control, peace, even a sense of beauty. If you woke the next day slightly uncomfortable but morally fortified, then the bed had done its job. You're half asleep now, cradled in your mental recreation of a Victorian bedtime masterpiece. A head perched just so, blankets tucked like a burrito crafted by someone with a ruler. But let's move beyond the bed frame and the lace, and shift our focus to the anatomical engineering of sleep itself, because no matter how elaborate the ritual or opulent the furniture, the Victorian experience of sleep came down to one crucial detail: what was under your head, under your knees, and unfortunately, sometimes underperforming. Yes, tonight's topic is all about pillows, bolsters, and the peculiar accessories that held Victorian spines in a polite but mildly miserable alignment. Let's begin with the bolster. This isn't the puffy decorative tube you see on a modern couch. No. The Victorian bolster was a functional log-shaped pillow that ran the width of the bed. Think of it like a firm, underwhelming sausage made of horsehair and good intentions. It wasn't soft, it wasn't optional, it was there to maintain your posture, keep your back slightly inclined, and remind you that slouching was for peasants and poets. Many people laid directly on the bolster, then placed a smaller, squarer pillow on top for neck support. Others preferred to wedge the bolster under their knees or use it to prop themselves sideways because, as we've established, sleep should never be comfortable, merely correct. And speaking of materials, Victorian pillows were stuffed with a variety of things. Goose feathers, if you were fancy; straw, if you were practical; horsehair, if you hated your neck; or even kapok, a silky fiber from tropical trees that somehow found its way into British bedding. A well-stuffed pillow was a matter of pride, but not necessarily comfort. If it made a light thump when dropped, you were good to go. If it made a squelch, you probably needed to let it dry out by the hearth. Quirky detail time. Some people scented their pillows. A popular method was to sew dried herbs of lavender, chamomile, even rosemary into tiny pouches and tuck them inside the pillowcase. These weren't just for relaxation. Victorians believed these scents could ward off illness, nightmares, or the invisible miasmas that supposedly floated through the air and ruined your entire immune system. No pressure, little sachet. Now, back to the neck roll. Some Victorians swore by a special neck bolster, a smaller, cylinder-shaped pillow meant to preserve posture and beauty during sleep. Think of it as the early cousin of those U-shaped airplane pillows, except less plush and more moralizing. It kept your head lifted, your chin aligned, and your dreams appropriately pious. This neck roll was particularly beloved by ladies concerned with their jawlines. Yes, before contouring and collagen injections, Victorian women had the postural pillow. Diaries from the period mention it alongside cold cream rituals and bonnet lacing techniques. A lady must wake as refined as she retires, one etiquette guide murmurs, very judgmentally. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian actually used all these pillows nightly or if these were more performative via a kind of bedroom choreography for special occasions, illnesses, or when being observed by judgmental relatives. But the evidence piles up. Sleep manuals of the 1800s often recommended specific pillow arrangements depending on your health. If the head be troubled with congestion, one chirped, use a pillow of rye and goose feathers, inclined at 30 degrees. Others offered diagrams, as if you were assembling IKEA furniture but for your cervical vertebrae. Let's not forget the infamous housewife pillow. This was a long, body-length cushion often used by elderly women or those recovering from illness. It provided full side support and could be wrapped around the sleeper for added warmth. Picture an emotional support burrito made of upholstery, oddly comforting, mildly claustrophobic, and deeply Victorian. Of course, none of these pillows meant much if your mattress was lacking. And oh, a broken bar the mattresses. Victorian mattresses came in two varieties, lumpy or lumpier. The best were stuffed with horsehair or wool, the worst, straw, seaweed, or whatever fibrous thing could be crammed into ticking fabric. Over time, these fillings would compress into hard ridges or bald spots, giving the sleeper a sort of topographical map to navigate each night. You didn't rest so much as negotiate with your bed. Some families periodically opened up their mattresses to redistribute the stuffing, a process called beating the bed, which sounds more therapeutic than it was. Others flipped their mattresses so often it became a kind of household dance. If you slept on the South Ridge Monday, Tuesday was the Western Slope, and while memory foam was a century away, the Victorians did their best. Some elite homes experimented with spring mattresses, a luxurious novelty at the time. These had internal coils and, in theory, offered better support. In reality, they often squeaked, sagged, and poked unsuspecting ribs. It was like sleeping on a poorly tuned harpsichord. You can imagine it now. A grand bedroom, candlelight flickering, a canopy fluttering in the breeze. You lower yourself onto your meticulously arranged mattress, two pillows, one neck roll, a faint scent of lavender. You shift, trying to find the sweet spot between supportive and bearable. The bed squeaks and protests. You adjust again, and again. Finally, you lie still, back straight, shoulders aligned, dreams appropriately moral. Your Victorian bed may be short, your pillow may be unforgiving, and your mattress may feel like a topographical map of the Alps, but by the standards of the time, you are doing it right. At this point, you're practically a certified Victorian sleep historian. Congratulations, you've endured bolsters, brandy, and bonnets, But we've only just cracked the frostbitten surface of what really shaped the Victorian sleep experience, because tonight, you are going to face the greatest enemy of rest in the 19th century, cold air. Victorians were absolutely, unwaveringly, irrationally terrified of drafts, not hurricanes, not burglars, not even ghosts, though we'll get to them later. No, the real domestic villain was a gentle current of uninvited air moving silently across the room. You lie there now, in your imagined Victorian bedroom, snuggled under layers of heavy woolen brocade. Outside, a light breeze stirs the curtains, and somewhere in the house, a window creaks open. You shiver because if you were Victorian, you'd believe that breeze was carrying disease, discomfort, and possibly death. Drafts were blamed for everything from colds and pneumonia to headaches, arthritis, and even a disordering of the female humors, whatever that means. In short, if air moved, it was out to get you. As a result, bedrooms were sealed off like fortresses, windows were shut tight, doors were blocked with tapestries or thick curtains, even keyholes were stuffed with cloth to prevent the night chill from sneaking through. The result: rooms that felt more like wool-lined crypts than places of rest. This paranoia bled into bed design. Shorter beds made it easier to stay bundled up in one warm pocket of air. You curled up, tucked in, pulled the covers tight. The less of you exposed to the atmosphere, the better. It was less about aesthetics and more about survival, if melodramatically so. Now let's talk curtains. Not window curtains, bed curtains. Many Victorian beds, especially in wealthier homes, had thick, floor-length drapes attached to a four-poster frame. They weren't there for privacy or romance, they were insulation. Once you drew those curtains closed, you created your own tiny microclimate, a warm little air pocket, rich with the scent of lavender pillows and possibly candle smoke. It sounds cozy until you remember that these beds were rarely washed, and that the heavy velvet or damask curtains likely trapped moisture, dust, and more than a few tiny insect tenants. But hey, at least you didn't catch a chill, right? Historians still argue whether this obsession with cold air was entirely baseless or just deeply misunderstood. Some suggest that in the days before germ theory fully took hold, drafts did often coincide with illness, and not because the air caused disease, but because cold homes lowered immunity. Others say it was mostly superstition. Either way, avoiding night air became a national pastime, and this fear extended to bedding materials, too. Feathers, tough duvets, too light, might let in the breeze. Victorians preferred weight, heavy wool, layer upon layer of dense, woven warmth. You didn't want a blanket, you wanted a sleep armor. If it didn't require a servant's assistance to lift, it wasn't warm enough. And don't even think about sticking a foot out. Exposing a limb to the night air was practically an invitation for illness, or, if you were particularly dramatic, spiritual possession. Some families even had custom quilts with extra side flaps to tuck in wandering appendages. No extremity was left behind. But despite all of this effort, homes remained cold. Central heating wasn't a thing. Fires helped, but only so much. Bedrooms, especially upstairs, were often freezing, and if you were poor or lived in a rural area, you were lucky if your water didn't freeze in the basin overnight. One fringe solution: the bed warmer. A long-handled metal pan filled with hot coals, slid between the sheets before bedtime. Sounds cozy, right? Except these were also known to set beds on fire, so you had to choose warm toes or potential immolation. Sleep tight. And then came the hot brick trick, a slightly safer alternative. You'd heat a brick by the hearth, wrap it in cloth, and place it at the foot of the bed. It radiated warmth for a few precious hours, just long enough to lull you into a false sense of security before the cold crept back in around 3 a.m. So yes, Victorian beds were short, but they were also intentionally sealed, a place to hide from the world, from cold, from illness, and if that meant curling into a human under 40 pounds of wool, so be it. There's something oddly poetic about it all, the way they wrapped themselves in fear and fabric, clutching hot water bottles and herbal sachets, whispering prayers against the wind. And maybe, just maybe, there's a little wisdom buried beneath the paranoia. Maybe they understood, in their own buttoned-up way, that sleep was fragile, that a good night's rest required protection, ritual, and yes, just the right amount of insulation. So as you drift off, warm and free in your modern climate-controlled room, offer a tiny, curled-up salute to your Victorian counterparts. May your dreams be as toasty as your toe, still tucked safely into your imagined cocoon of Victorian velvet. You might now be wondering, a broken bar, what, exactly, were you sleeping on? Because while we've gone on at length, ironically, considering the bed sizes, about headboards, bolsters, and bedding rituals, we've neglected one crucial element of the Victorian sleep equation: the mattress. Ah, yes, the foundation of your nightly repose, the unsung hero or villain beneath all the decorative nonsense. And spoiler alert, if you were hoping for cloud-like comfort, you are in the wrong century. Let's start at the base, literally. In many homes, especially earlier in the era, mattresses rested not on slatted frames or box springs but on tightly strung ropes. Picture a wooden bed frame laced with thick cords, crisscrossed like a badly planned spiderweb. Your mattress sat on top of this, supported not by structure but tension. Over time, those ropes sagged. That's where the phrase "sleep tight" comes from, not a sweet bedtime wish, but a literal reminder to tighten the ropes if you didn't want to roll into a hammock of disappointment. You settle in now, testing your weight on the imaginary ropes. There's a suspicious creak. That's your cue to call in the housemate, who will, with some effort, twist a special key-like tool to retighten the web. This was a weekly or even nightly ritual in many households. A bed that wasn't tight was a bed that swallowed spines. Now for the mattress itself: horsehair, wool, straw, moss, seaweed, even shredded rags if money was tight. That's the range you were working with. If it could be stuffed, sewn, and somewhat flattened, it could be slept on. These materials weren't exactly temperature neutral, either. Wool made you sweat, straw made you itch, horsehair poked through the ticking, and seaweed, well, it didn't smell like lavender, that's for sure. The wealthier you were, the more layers you added: a bottom mattress of horsehair, a middle layer of wool, and a feather bed topper were the dream for the Victorian elite. You didn't just sleep on the mattress, you floated in it, like an overcooked dumpling. But even the poshest mattresses had their flaws. They weren't designed for spine support or pressure relief. They didn't contour to your body. If anything, they subtly reshaped you. Long nights on a poorly balanced feather bed left many Victorians waking up with what doctors referred to, very delicately, as disordered constitutions, aka, you hurt all over. This led to a wave of mattress innovation. Yes, even in the 19th century, entrepreneurs were trying to sell people on the perfect sleep. In 1857, one particularly hopeful inventor advertised a mattress filled with newly patented breathable cork granules. Another promised the silent mattress, which was supposed to stop the infamous squeaking caused by rope or spring beds. Unfortunately, it was also described as entirely rigid, so that went well. Fringe fact: some beds even had water mattresses. Yes, you heard that right. These early versions involved thick rubber or waxed canvas bladders filled with lukewarm water, meant to relieve bed sores or assist invalids. They were popular in hospitals and homes for the infirm, but as you might imagine, they were prone to leaks, mildew, and the occasional unpleasant squelch. And then there were the early spring mattresses, a true leap toward modern comfort, or so people thought. Coils were inserted beneath the surface to create dynamic resistance to body weight. Sounds futuristic, right? Except many early models used stiff, and wound springs that weren't properly stabilized. The result, a bouncy, booby-trapped trampoline where any sudden movement could launch your spouse into orbit. Historians still argue whether spring mattresses were widely accepted in the Victorian home, or remained more of a medical oddity. Advertisements abounded, but uptake was slow. Many people, especially the elderly, distrusted the unnatural motion of springs. Plus, if you'd spent your life curling up on straw, why mess with progress? Mattress hygiene was another matter altogether. Feathers molded, wool matted, straw attracted bugs. Mattresses had to be aired out in the sun, beaten with sticks, or entirely restuffed every few years. In some households, there was a designated mattress day, where all bedding was stripped, dragged into the yard, and assaulted until the stuffing agreed to behave again. And let's not forget the mattress ticking of the outer casing, usually made of strong linen or cotton. It was often striped, blue and white was common. Why? The stripes supposedly made it easier to spot bugs. Yes, you heard that right. Ticking stripe wasn't a design choice, it was pest surveillance. Imagine sleeping on something so infested. Your pillowcases had built-in search grids. You, now nestled back into your imaginary Victorian bed, might start to appreciate your memory foam topper a little more. No rope tightening, no hair poking, no unexpected bounce catapulting you into the nightstand. And you ate a broken bar. There's something about the effort, the daily rituals, the sheer craftsmanship of it all. These weren't disposable pieces of furniture. A mattress was patched, repaired, handed down, and fought with like an old, stubborn relative. In a way, they were more than beds. They were part of the family. So tonight, as you drift off on your delightfully boring modern bed, spare a soft, sympathetic nod to the Victorians who lay upon straw and seaweed, horsehair and springs. Their spines askew, their bolsters firm, and their dreams as always strangely upright. By now, your imaginary Victorian self has braved tightrope-sprung beds, horsehair mattresses, and the perilous world of posture pillows. But what if I told you that some Victorians didn't just tolerate the discomfort of short, rigid beds, a broken bar, they desired it? Strange, right? Yet here we are, entering the peculiar realm of fashionably frail Victorianza, where being delicate wasn't a disadvantage, but a statement, a virtue, a whole aesthetic. Let's be clear. This wasn't about actual illness, at least, not always. This was about appearing delicate. About cultivating an image of genteel fragility so convincing it practically coughed in italics. And it absolutely spilled into bed design, sleep behavior, and the bizarre celebration of weakness that defined a surprising portion of Victorian culture. You roll onto your side now gently, of course, and picture yourself as a member of the fainting elite, your skin, porcelain pale, your waist, tightly corseted, your expression, permanently wary, with just a hint of poetry, your furniture, small, curved, feminine, and your bed, short, petite, decorative, because nothing says, I'm doing femininity right like a bed that looks like it could also be a serving tray. At the heart of this trend was the idea that frailty was feminine, and femininity, in the Victorian imagination, was prized most when it was subdued, passive, and draped in lace. Women were expected to be physically small, morally pure, and constantly hovering just one bad cough away from death by heartbreak. Enter the fainting couch, technically not a bed, but a close cousin. The fainting couch was designed for the dramatic recline. Armless on one side, it allowed corset-constricted women to collapse stylishly in salons or drawing rooms. It symbolized exactly what society expected of them: beauty, delicacy, and the inability to stand for too long without swooning. Now take that aesthetic, a broken bar, and roll it right into the bedroom. Bed frames began to mirror this visual vocabulary: curved footboards, slender posts, and shorter lengths that subtly reinforced the image of a woman so ethereal, so exquisitely breakable, that she didn't need room to stretch it, just a space to shimmer faintly in moonlight. Even the bedding changed. Colors leaned toward pale pastels, fabrics were thinner, gauzier, dreamier, not built for warmth or function, but for appearance. A lady's bed was meant to float, lace dangled like mist, quilts were embroidered with poems or floral motifs, and while you or I might look at one and say, "That's decorative," a Victorian might look and say, "That's a sleep altar." Historians still argue whether this culture of cultivated fragility genuinely influenced bed dimensions or was just a broader social mood reflected in furnishings. Did women ask for shorter beds, or were they simply given them because society expected their very bodies to occupy less space? It's a subtle kind of control, really, designing a world that says, "You don't need to stretch it, you shouldn't even try." And it wasn't just women. Young boys were also expected to demonstrate modesty and restraint. Their beds, too, were often scaled down, and not because of their height, necessarily, but to enforce a sense of order, of containment. One anecdote tells of a wealthy family who commissioned identical short beds for all their sons, each one nestled into a dormitory-style room with matching coverlets. It was less a nursery and more a training ground for upright behavior. There's also the matter of illness as accessory. Tuberculosis, as we mentioned earlier, was seen not just as a disease but a tragic fashion, a slow fade. People wrote poems about it, painted it, built entire characters in novels around its aesthetic. And so, a short, somber bed complete with monogrammed linens and a discreet bell pull for summoning your physician fit right into this oddly performative grief chic. Quirky tidbit: some high society women staged bedroom portraits. These were photographs taken in soft lighting, with the subject reclining dramatically among pillows, a book in hand, eyes distant, as if contemplating mortality between chapters. The bed wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a set, a mood, an Instagram filter for the soul. And let's not forget the invalid chair, another cousin in the furniture family. This piece was essentially a reclining wheelchair bed hybrid. It allowed the fashionably ill to be wheeled from room to room while still appearing poetically horizontal. Short beds took on a similar role in bedrooms. They signaled stillness, submission to life's gentle burdens, and of course decorative restraint. You lie back now in your imagined frailty bed. Everything around you is soft focus. The wallpaper is floral, the candlelight flickers, your spine is doing its best impersonation of a question mark. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but that's okay. Comfort wasn't the goal. The goal was to be beautiful in rest, to occupy space quietly. And while it's easy to scoff, there's something undeniably fascinating about it. A whole society designing their rest around an idea of controlled suffering, of decorative discomfort, of sleep as stagecraft. So next time you sprawl sideways on your mattress, arms out, mouth open, dreaming about Takase, you'll know just how radical that is, and you'll thank your stars that no one is taking a soft focus photo of you mid-snore. By now, you're deeply nested in your Victorian imagination, your knees curled under a lavender-scented quilt, your head perched on a prayer-approved bolster. You've navigated social norms, architectural paranoia, and the fading aesthetic, but now we shift from cultural fashion to something sneakier, more practical, and frankly more frustrating: inheritance. Yes, inheritance. That solemn, dusty process that decided who got what when Aunt Beatrice finally stopped dramatically coughing into her lace handkerchief. And when it came to beds, especially the good ones, they stayed in the family for generations, which meant that not only were you likely to sleep in your grandparents' bed, but you were also expected to appreciate it, despite the fact that your legs might be a full 8 inches longer than grandfather's ever were. Imagine the scene: you've just married into a respectable Victorian family, your new in-laws proudly show you the ancestral bedroom suite, complete with an immovable short bed, a headboard large enough to signal ships, and maybe a matching fainting couch with the springs gone limp from decades of gentle swoons. It's solid mahogany, they say, as if that somehow makes it longer. You smile politely, but inside, your knees are screaming. The idea of upgrading a bed, especially a handcrafted Onia, was often seen as wasteful, or worse, ungrateful. These were not IKEA furnishings to be tossed when your apartment lease ended. These beds were built to last, and they did, sometimes longer than the people sleeping in them. Some historians even note that in middle-class households, beds were passed down the same way we pass down heirloom jewelry today. They came with expectations, stories, even nicknames. One diary from the 1870s mentions mother's marriage bed, which was given to the eldest daughter as a mark of honor and continuity. Never mind that the daughter was 5'10" and engaged to a man nicknamed the lamppost. French fact: many old bed frames were physically too big to remove from the room once assembled. They were brought in pieces and constructed inside the room. So if you inherited the bed, you inherited the room too. Moving wasn't just discouraged, it was structurally impossible. There's even a quiet suggestion in some etiquette guides that you shouldn't want to replace the family bed. It was seen as a broken bar code, disloyal, almost like asking for new ancestors. And besides, if your great-aunt had survived cholera in this bed, so could you. The emotional weight of inheritance didn't just preserve impractical furniture, it locked people into certain behaviors. You didn't complain that the bed was short, you just adapted, rolled onto your side, curled your knees, added a footstool if necessary, because the symbolism mattered more than the spine alignment. It wasn't just a class issue either. In rural areas, families passed down everything from farm tools to bed frames to the blankets that covered them, and yes, those handmade quilts, also inherited. If you were lucky, your name was embroidered in the corner. If not, you just had to figure out who Bessie, 1849 was and try not to drool on her legacy. Even in the upper class, updating a bed could raise eyebrows. New furniture suggested either newfound wealth, how vulgar, or a distaste for the old ways, how American. A wife asking her husband for a new bed frame might be told, gently, that the family bed has served us all quite adequately, which, if anything, sounds like an unsettling line from a Gothic novel. And so the cycle continued. Short beds survived, and not because they were better, but because they were entrenched, symbolically, physically, emotionally. Once a certain design became the standard, it was difficult to imagine a longer alternative. Even as people slowly grew taller, thank you, industrial era nutrition, the furniture stayed stubborn. One quirky exception: hotels. As travel increased in the 19th century, some innkeepers began offering longer beds to appeal to tall gentlemen, or at least the illusion of length. Clever furniture makers started designing bed frames with extended footboards or no footboards at all, giving lanky travelers a fighting chance. But at home, the family bed endured. You shift now in your imaginary heirloom bed, realizing that it probably smells like inheritance, a mix of lavender, wax polish, and generational disappointment. Still, there's something oddly comforting about it. The idea that so many people before you have curled into this same narrow space, dreamed, cried, coughed politely into their lace. And as much as your modern sensibilities beg for memory foam and ergonomic slats, part of you understands the appeal. A bed wasn't just furniture, it was a timeline. A way to sleep not just in your own story but in someone else's. So tonight, as you stretch gloriously, rebelliously across your modern mattress, spare a thought for those who couldn't, who inherited more than they asked for, who folded their knees for tradition, and who, perhaps, whispered goodnight to 3 generations of ghosts before blowing out the candle. You're now quite the seasoned Victorian dreamer, propped, padded, and perfectly positioned in a bed barely long enough to host your ambitions, let alone your ankles. But just as you begin to doze off in your gently inherited mattress cocoon, A chill passes down your spine. Is it the night terror, the cold brass bed frame, or could it be broken bar ghost at the foot of the bed? Yes, we're going there, because no tour of Victorian sleep would be complete without addressing the fact that a shocking number of Victorians believed bedtime was when the veil between worlds got particularly thin, and their beds short, stiff, and surrounded by drapes were often imagined as perfect stages for ghostly encounters. Picture it. You're nestled under your layers, the candle just snuffed, the darkness thick, you hear it, a creak, a breath, the unmistakable sound of a slippered footfall that shouldn't be there. You peer toward the foot of the bed, heart hammering, and what do you see? Maybe nothing, maybe a shape, maybe Great Uncle Henry in his dressing gown. 6 years late for supper. Victorians were obsessed with the supernatural. Seances were all the rage. Ghost stories were serialized in newspapers. Even Queen Victoria herself was known to consult spiritualists after the death of Prince Albert. And nowhere was this ghostly fascination more vivid than at night, when people retreated to their rooms and their minds began to wander. Beds, of course, played a starring role. A common Victorian ghost story trope involved a figure standing at the foot of the bed, silent, watching, sometimes weeping, sometimes pointing. This wasn't just literary fancy, it was widely believed. People even described visitations during half-sleep states, when they'd wake to find somebody, often a deceased relative, standing at the edge of the mattress. Short bed? No problem. Ghosts don't need much legroom, and the bed curtains didn't help. Yes, those heavy, sound-muffling, privacy-loving drapes also happened to create the perfect environment for shadowy figures to hide. Pull the curtains closed and you were Safi, a broken bar until the breeze moved them, or you imagined it did. A face glimpsed in the folds, a whisper behind the fabric, or worst of all, the sound of breathing that wasn't yours. Historians still argue whether these phenomena were fueled more by superstition or by science. Some point to hypnagogic hallucinations of vivid sensory experiences that happen during the transition between wakefulness and sleep. Others blame gaslighting, and not the emotional kind, but actual gas lamps. Poor ventilation could lead to hallucinations, dizziness, and a general sense of unease. Combine that with a draft and a rattling window, and boom, you've summoned Aunt Mildred's ghost without even trying. Some even suggest that the very architecture of Victorian bedrooms contributed to this spectral fear. Narrow rooms, tall ceilings, wallpaper that moved subtly in candlelight, all of it added to the drama, especially if you were alone. Especially if you just finished a gothic novel, or especially if the floorboards creaked in exactly the same rhythm as a polite Victorian ghost in slippers. One fringe theory: some believed short beds kept your feet closer to the ground and therefore closer to the underworld. Yes, that was a thing. According to a few particularly dramatic spiritualists, dreams were a bridge to the beyond, and a shorter bed meant your soul had a shorter journey. Convenient, but it wasn't all doom and ghosts. There were also comforting spirits. Some Victorians believed they were visited by benevolent presences, departed loved ones who watched over them at night, or guardian angels who smoothed their dreams. Letters from the period describe feelings of lightness or a hand brushing the forehead during sleep, whether psychological or spectral. It made the bed not just a place of rest but a portal. And beds, by their very design, invited reflection on mortality. Think about it: you lie still, you draw the curtains, you fold your hands. For many Victorians, this resembled another deeply familiar ritual, the laying out of the dead. That's not morbid, okay? Yes, it is, but it was also practical. In many homes, bodies were kept in the bedroom for several days after death, sometimes in the very bed where the person passed. The bed became both a site of sleep and of mourning. It's no wonder people associated it with the mysterious and the eternal. Even the term bedside manner has roots in this overlap. Doctors visiting the dying, priests offering last rites, loved ones holding vigil, all of it happened right there. In the same short bed you slept in the night before, you curl deeper now into your blankets, comforted and mildly creeped out. The candle has burned low, the shadows lengthen. You wonder if Victorians were terrified or simply prepared, if ghosts were guests, not intruders, if sleep was less about escape and more about reunion. You listen, a floorboard creaks, probably just the house settling, or perhaps someone you've inherited more than just a mattress from. But fear not, in the Victorian world, a haunted bed was just another kind of family heirloom. You've survived the ghostly glances at the foot of your bed, whispered prayers, and the occasional creaking floorboard that definitely wasn't just the house settling. But tonight, as the fire dies low and the gaslight flickers uncertainly and scones, let's shift from the spectral to the scientific, because near the end of the Victorian era, something remarkable began to stir. People started asking not just how to sleep, but how to sleep better. Yes, welcome to the birth of bedtime science, a curious, often contradictory world where doctors, philosophers, and overly confident men in top hats try to crack the mystery of sleep using diagrams, digestive metaphors, and occasionally a broken bar mustard plasters. It all began with a question: what is the correct way to sleep? And from there, things spiraled into elaborate theories involving blood flow, organ positioning, and even planetary alignment. Victorian physicians loved a good rulebook, and they didn't stop at posture or pajamas. They dissected every element of the bedtime routine: meals, lighting, furniture placement, with the thoroughness of someone rearranging a chessboard for moral clarity. One of the most widely accepted medical ideas of the time? That sleeping on your right side was healthier than the left. Why? Because some believed the stomach lay mostly on the left, and sleeping on that side would squish it, leading to indigestion, nightmares, or worse, moral laxity. Yes, really. Others claimed that left-side sleeping caused your liver to tilt unnaturally, blocking the body's natural drainage. Sleep, in their view, was 1 part rest, 2 parts internal plumbing. Another theory, this one quite popular, held that sleeping face up could invite disease, not because of exposure or ghosts, but because your mouth might open. A gaping mouth was not only unattractive but believed to invite miasma, the dreaded bad air we now know was not, in fact, sentient. Still, many insisted on sleeping with the mouth closed and the chin tilted slightly downward to preserve the throat's composure. Sounds relaxing, right? Then there was the matter of lighting. Some doctors advised total darkness, arguing that light disturbed the nerves. Others countered that a small, low flame kept one's dreams anchored to the waking world and could prevent night terrors. A few even recommended colored lamps: green for soothing, red for melancholy, blue for romantic restraint. Your dreams, they believed, could be tinted like a stage set. As you lie back now, try to imagine this world of conflicting advice. One book tells you to elevate your knees, another says that compresses the lungs. A pamphlet insists that a glass of warm milk prevents restlessness. Another swears by cold port wine and a slice of Stilton. You're not sleeping. You're navigating a Victorian maze of nocturnal do's and don'ts. Historians still argue whether this influx of medical interest improved sleep hygiene or simply replaced superstition with pseudoscience. Probably both. Certainly, some advances helped. Doctors began noticing the links between overwork and insomnia, between poor diet and restlessness. They promoted fresh air, moderate exercise, and yes, better beds, especially ones that could accommodate full-length adult bodies. Enter the adjustable bed frame, a late Victorian invention. These were often marketed to the elderly or convalescent, but clever consumers realized they had everyday appeal. You could now incline the head, raise the feet, even extend the frame if needed. Some called them invalid beds, but a few forward-thinking companies rebranded them as health beds. Still short by modern standards, but it was progress. Even pillow design evolved. A few eccentric thinkers promoted the idea of orthopedic sleeping using pillows to align the spine and keep the airway clear. They didn't have CPAP machines, but they were beginning to ask the right questions. Should one dream with a straight back? One headline wondered. The answer, apparently, was yes, but only if you also applied a vapor rub to your temples and drank licorice water beforehand. Fringe belief alert. A particularly intense group of wellness enthusiasts known as hydrotherapists swore by sleeping on wet mattresses, not soaking, but dampened with cold water, wrapped in linen, and believed to pull fevers from the blood. Unsurprisingly, this didn't catch on, nor did its sequel, the chill pillow, chilled in an icebox and placed under the neck, ideal for hot summer nights, also ideal for waking up with frostbite. And yet amid all the nonsense some pearls of wisdom emerged. Victorians began to embrace routine, set bedtimes, gentle transitions, fewer heavy meals at night. Doctors started noting the importance of winding down slowly, of reducing stimulation, of soft lighting and even gentle background noise like a ticking clock or the wind outside. If that sounds familiar, it's because your favorite sleep podcast probably says the same thing minus the mustard plasters. You lie still now, thinking of all those people across the 19th century tossing, turning, trying chamomile and flannel-wrapped feet, searching for peace. They didn't have sleep apps, they didn't have blackout curtains, but they had a growing awareness that sleep was something to be cared for, not just collapsed into. So while you may not want to adopt their rigid sleep posture, or their fondness for goat hair neck rolls, maybe just maybe you can thank the Victorians for asking the question that still keeps us up at night: how do we truly rest? And maybe the answer is as simple as this: curl up, breathe deep, ignore the miasma, and hope your adjustable frame isn't haunted. You're almost at the end now, wrapped in every layer of the Victorian sleep experience like a slightly overwhelmed lasagna. Your knees have adjusted to the curve of the short bed, your ghostly visitors have hopefully decided to leave you be, and the candle has burned down to a sleepy stub. But before we fade to black, there's one last chapter in this oddly elegant, oddly cramped tale. How beds finally got bigger. It didn't happen all at once. In fact, the end of the short bed era was less a revolution and more a slow, sighing stretch across generations. While the Victorian age maintained a firm grip on its tightly tucked traditions, the early 20th century began nudging the world gently toward a wider, longer, more sprawled-out version of rest. Several things pushed this sleepy evolution forward. First, people were getting taller. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to better nutrition, hygiene, and public health, the average height in many countries began to rise. The old excuse that people used to be shorter was starting to wear thin, especially when your feet hung off the inherited bed your great uncle used to sleep in sideways. Second, mass production. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change factories, it changed furniture, as bed making became less about bespoke carpentry and more about standardized parts. Manufacturers saw the appeal of creating uniform sizes, and once those sizes started expanding, consumers, and their limbs, rejoiced. The new standard bed lengths gradually shifted from 72 inches, 6 feet, to 75. And eventually to 80. Widths expanded too. By the 1920s, the double beta, what we now call a full, was increasingly common, and by the mid-20th century, queen and king-sized beds were symbols of suburban comfort, marital harmony, and long-limbed liberation. Third, the decline of inherited furniture, as people moved more frequently, rented apartments, and stopped treating furniture as sacred relics. The family bed lost its grip. Young couples no longer wanted to sleep in a creaky four-poster that smelled like beeswax and unresolved Victorian trauma. They wanted something new, longer, springier, possibly something you could build with an Allen wrench and a questionable instruction manual. But it wasn't just size that changed, attitudes shifted. Sleep became less about moral performance and more about health. Doctors promoted proper rest not as a symbol of virtue but as a medical necessity. The old rule as no stretching, no lounging, no morning indulgences began to dissolve. Beds became havens, not altars. Blankets got fluffier, pajamas got looser, and posture pillows were gently relocated to the back of the closet. Even literature changed its tone, where Victorian novels often featured sleep as a side of ghostly visitations, tragic illness, or quiet despair. 20th century stories began celebrating the comfort of bed. Think of how often beds appear in cozy scenes as a mother's reading bedtime stories, lovers wrapped in sheets, characters reflecting beneath duvets. The bed stopped being a battleground and became a sanctuary. That's not to say the Victorians didn't leave their mark. Much of what we still value is soft lighting, bedtime rituals, evening teas, tidy sheets can be traced back to their influence. Their obsession with routine, their reverence for quiet, and their belief in preparing for sleep with dignity all echo in our modern habits. They made rest something worthy of attention, even if their methods were broken bar tightly restricted and mildly haunted. And what about the beds themselves? Many still survive, short, beautiful, ornately carved museum pieces that remind us of how people once lived and slept. Antique collectors prize them, bed and breakfast owners boast of them. Some still even use them, though most will quietly admit that, yes, they added a hidden platform to make it longer. So here you are, no longer squeezed into a velvet upholstered rectangle. Your limbs finally have room. Your mattress is thick and forgiving. Your pillow doesn't smell like mothballs and Victorian anxiety. You stretch, gloriously, defiantly. You've outgrown the era, but not the appreciation. Because knowing how people once slept, what they feared, what they believed, how they wrapped themselves in wool and ritual makes your own bed feel just a little more sacred, a little more earned. And maybe, tonight, you'll drift off with a smile, not just because you're comfortably but because you understand the strange beauty of the short bed, the tiny stage on which so many people performed their final act of the day gracefully, uncomfortably, and completely tucked in. And now, with our journey through stiff bolsters and squeaky rope beds behind us, you're lulled at last to simply rest. Let the sounds fade. The flicker of gas lamps becomes a glow behind your eyelids. The lace curtain in your mind's eye settles still. There are no ghosts now, no doctors tapping your spine or etiquette books urging you to sleep upright. Just you, the hush of breath, and a weightless calm. Breathe slowly. Imagine the bed beneath you softening, lengthening, welcoming every inch of you without judgment. You can stretch now, fully and without consequence. Let your arms rest loose. Let your legs relax into space the Victorians never imagined. The world narrows to this moment, not to what's outside your window, not to what you forgot today or need tomorrow. Just here, just now, a gently darkened space where nothing is required of you and no posture, no performance, no prayer whispered toward a spiderwebbed canopy. You're safe, warm, complete. Let your mind drift like candle smoke through an open window. Let the room of your thoughts dim, soft, and golden. The echo of footsteps fades down a hallway that no longer matters. The creak of the headboard becomes the lull of a distant memory. You're not lying in a short Victorian bed anymore. You're floating. You're free. Sleep well, dream gently, and remember, no matter how bizarre history becomes, it always makes a strangely soothing bedtime story. Hey guys, tonight we step quietly through the misty hills of Scandinavia, back to a time when longships slept on fjords and stories curled like smoke from every hearth. You're waking up on a scratchy straw mattress in a Viking age-long house, your breath already visible in the chill morning air. The fire has burned down to embers, and someone's probably snoring nearby, but your job starts before the first crow caws. You're a beekeeper, and in this world, That means patience, bravery, and a healthy tolerance for bee stings in places you'd rather not discuss. You probably won't survive this. Let's be honest, between the barefoot mornings, unpredictable weather, and unpredictable bees, your odds aren't great, but at least your life will smell like honey, wood smoke, and damp willow, which is more than most medieval folks can say. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you're up for it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink awake in the half-dark, your breath fogging gently in front of you. The thatch overhead is dotted with frost. Around you, bundled shapes snore under woolen blankets as siblings, cousins, maybe a goat. You shift slowly, careful not to rustle the straw too much. The cold hits your feet first, then your elbows. Your knees are already planning their revenge. You slip into your day without ceremony. No alarm clocks, no journaling, just a creaky stretch and a silent trudge toward the fire pit. Probably your mother has already coaxed a small flame back to life. The orange glow flickers against blackened beams. Outside, it's still twilight, and the hills around your farmstead are wrapped in a damp hush. Your job this morning is simple: check the hives before the sun rises too high. Bees don't wait for breakfast, they operate on a strict solar schedule, and if you're late, they'll let you know violently, with little daggers of buzzing justice. You wrap yourself in a thick tunic, itchy with lanolin, and pull on your boots, a wooden soled with leather straps. They're stiff, damp, and smell like last week's fish stew. There's no such thing as waterproofing in this world, just an acceptance that your socks will always be slightly damp and your toes slightly resigned. You grab your woven basket and a smudge stick of dried herbs, then step outside into the freezing morning air. The land is hushed, muffled by fog. Birds aren't even pretending to chirp yet. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the splash of a fish jumping, or maybe just a rock slipping. Either way, you tighten your cloak and begin the walk. Your hives are tucked into the hillside, small dome-shaped scoops made from coiled straw. They're clustered near a patch of wild heather, the kind that hums in summer with golden life but now lies quiet, sleeping beneath frost. The path is muddy, your boots squelch. Somewhere, a raven laughs at you from a pine tree. Historians still argue whether Vikings kept bees as widely as later medieval cultures, or whether it was a niche practice limited to certain regions of particularly southern Scandinavia, where the climate could support them more easily. But one thing is clear: honey and wax were precious, not just for food, but for medicine, preservation, trade, and ritual. If your bees thrive, you thrive. You reach the hives and crouch. They look quiet, no movement yet a good. You unroll your smudge stick, strike a flint, and coax a curl of smoke from the dried herbs. The smell is earthy, sharp, calming, not just for the bees, but for you too. Because even now, before sunrise, before the world has begun, you feel the buzz, that invisible hum of something ancient and alive. You don't speak aloud, not because it's sacred, though it's sort of icy, but because talking might wake the bees prematurely. And really, who wants to be the one that stirs a hive before the queen has had her coffee? You place your hand gently on the script just the edge, where it's warmest. You wait, you listen, you feel it, the low, thrumming vibration of life, stacked in thousands. Your bees are still asleep, clustered for warmth. For now, you smile. There's work to be done today. Honey to check, hive entrances to clear, maybe a little offering to leave for Freyr, just a pinch of grain or a whispered charm for protection. But for this moment, you're still, grounded, wrapped in the cold and the quiet hum of life waiting to wake. And it's not a bad way to start a day, really. You shift your weight, rising from your crouch as the first pale blush of morning seeps over the distant ridge. The smoke from your herb bundle curls lazily, dancing in the cold air like a sleepy spirit unsure if it's meant to rise or linger. You tuck it into a little leather pouch, careful not to smother it into regalia, and begin your quiet walk back to the longhouse. You're still half asleep, toes damp, nose frozen, stomach quietly filing a complaint. Inside, the house has begun to stir, a low murmur of voices, the crackle of firewood finally catching, the thump of someone stomping their boots against the threshold. You duck back in, the sudden warmth fogging your vision. You blink, breathe, and catch the scent of something familiar. The porridge you've eaten almost every morning of your life. Before you eat, though, you have to change out of your outdoor wool. It's heavy with moisture now, and likely spattered with a generous helping of mud from your early trek. You slip it off with practiced speed, teeth chattering, and pull on the drier tunic from the woven peg hook on the wall. It's no fashion show. Viking clothes are about practicality first, second, and forever, but there's a method to it. Your under tunic is soft wool, and dyed a muted brown from onion skins or birch bark. Over that goes a thicker outer tunic, woven by your sister from wool carded during the long winter nights. There's a belt of leather around your waist, worn slick from years of use. You tuck a knife into it without thinking, because this is the Viking age, and everyone carries a knife, even while making breakfast. And then a broken bar. The boots, they're wooden-soled and stiff from damp. You hesitate for a moment, rubbing the heel of one foot against the back of your calf. The boots go on, begrudgingly. Inside, you can already feel a piece of straw poking through your wool sock. Somewhere, your ancestors are laughing. Historians still debate just how accurate are depictions of Viking dress, how much comes from archaeological finds and how much from dramatic reconstructions. But we know this: wool was everywhere, leather, too, but only if you could afford it. Linen was prized but expensive, and layers were everything, not just for warmth, but for survival. And unfortunately, none of these layers ever stop touching. You make your way to the low bench near the fire. Your brother is already halfway through his bowl, steam curling from the grainy mixture. A pot sits suspended over the fire, bubbling thickly. Someone stirs it with a wooden ladle as big as your head. You're handed a bowl of crude pottery, warm in your palms and given a generous scoop. It's barley today, sweetened with a little bit of your own honey. You smile at that. Not much. Just a spoonful or two, but it makes all the difference. Your bees did well this summer, and now your family gets to taste the reward, a sticky, golden richness cutting through the bland grayness of porridge. It might as well be magic. You eat in silence. Talking during the first meal is rare. Some say it's superstition, others say it's just sleepiness. You watch the fire crackle. Your sister braids her hair without looking. Your mother sips her mead slowly, eyebrows already raised in judgment at nothing in particular. Then comes the second part of your morning ritual, preparing for the rest of the day. You check your pouch, a little dried fish for lunch, a strip of beeswax you'll trade at the market later, your smudge stick, a flint, a tiny charm card from bone, meant to protect against stings, though you suspect it's more for confidence than actual effect. You wrap it all in a square of cloth and tie it neatly. Then you sling it over your shoulder. The bag cuts across your chest, the strap worn smooth. You roll your shoulders, stretch your arms, and try not to think about how many steps you've yet to take today. You glance outside. The light has shifted. The clouds are high and gray, the kind that hang around without making promises. A good day for bees, a better one for markets. But first, more work. One of your hives has been slow this season. You'll need to check it again before midday. Maybe the queen isn't strong, maybe the comb's been invaded by mites, or maybe, as your uncle insists, it's just moody. Bees, he claims, are like people, temperamental, social, and occasionally vengeful. You tighten your cloak, now dry and warmer, and grab your staff. Not for walking, really, but for nudging open hive lids, lifting baskets, or, occasionally, fending off overly curious goats. You step back outside, and for a moment, just a moment, you pause. The mist has lifted, the sky is wide and cold and pale, the frost is melting on the grass, and the faintest buzz, if faint, but unmistakably drifts toward your ears. The bees are waking up, and so are you. You make your way toward the outer edge of the homestead, where the ground gives way to heather and brush, and the wind carries a different kind of scent, less smoke, more earth. The dew still clings to the grass, glistening like tiny beads of amber. You squint toward the slope where your hives sit, nestled safely behind a half-circle of woven fencing, just far enough from the longhouse to keep family members from grumbling about bee stings at supper. The sun is finally climbing now, just brushing the tops of the birches. It'll warm the scopes soon, which means the bees will start to stir. You've got a little time, just enough to eat something a bit more motivating than porridge. You untie the small pouch tucked into your belt. Inside is a chunk of coarse barley bread and a sliver of dried fish, but nestled between them, carefully wrapped in leaves, is a spoonful of honey from last season. You press it between your fingers for a moment. It's dark, almost reddish, clover and heather and wild thyme blended by bees who've never heard of sugar, only sunlight and flower dust. You spread the honey on your bread and take a bite. It's sticky and slightly gritty, but it's good, really good. Sweetness isn't an everyday thing in your world. It's precious, reserved for rituals, healing, or moments like these, standing in the pale morning sun, eating a slow breakfast while your bees buzz sleepily in their thatched domes. You wash it down with a sip of watered mead, just a sip, enough to warm your chest and maybe your courage. Mead isn't just for feasting, it's also the breakfast of those with too much to do and not enough sunlight to do it in. Historians still debate how widely mead was consumed in daily life versus ceremonial occasions. Some believe it was reserved for the wealthy or for high feasts. Others argue it was more common, especially in smaller doses, diluted with water and consumed as a tonic. Either way, yours is light, a touch sour, and surprisingly calming. You sit on a flat rock near the hive fence and let your bones relax. Your staff lies across your lap. Somewhere nearby, a thrush calls out. You hum a little Unreasonably, not a song exactly, just a note you picked up from your grandmother. She used to sing near the hives, said the bees liked it. Whether it's true or not, you've never stopped. And now, it's time. You stand slowly, wipe your hands on your tunic, and move toward the hives. There are 5 today, all old, all made from coiled dry straw and shaped like little haystacks. They don't look like much, just lumpy domes covered in mud and patched with wool here and there to block cracks. But inside thousands of tiny bodies, golden wings, humming minds, each hive its own city, its own queen, its own heartbeat. You don't wear gloves, you don't wear veil, no one does, not because you're brave, although you are, but because those things haven't been invented yet. Your protection is smoke, timing, and a working relationship with the bees based mostly on mutual tolerance and occasional flattery. You light your smudge stick again. This time it's mugwort and dried moss, twisted tightly and smelling like a damp forest after rain. The smoke drifts in slow ribbons. You wave it gently toward the first hive. The bees react slowly, lazily. They aren't angry yet, still waking, still gathering themselves. You kneel, lifting the straw dome slightly with a carved wooden hook. Inside, honeycomb. You smile. Golden slabs hang thick between the ribs of the skep, shining in the low sun. You don't take it all. That would be foolish. Just enough to check quality. Maybe carve off a small piece to trade. The rest you leave for the bees, for the next frost, for tomorrow. You shift to the second hive. This one's always been a little unruly. You hum again as you work. A few bees buzz your cheek, inspecting your breath, your presence, your intentions. You keep your movements slow, Your grandmother's voice echoes in your head. Don't be greedy, don't be loud, don't give them no reason. Historians still argue whether Viking Age people fully understood bee behavior or whether their management was more trial and error with a spiritual coding. What's clear is that bees were respected, feared, sometimes spoken to like old gods. You've never seen anyone curse a hive and leave unscathed. There's a superstition in your family: if a beekeeper dies, someone must tell the bees, whisper it at the hive, or else the bees will leave. You believe it. You reach into your pouch, pull out a small cloth, and wrap a fresh piece of comb in it. It's heavy, sweet, and will fetch something useful at the market, perhaps a new comb, or a spool of thread, or a tiny silver pendant shaped like a sun disk. You work steadily, hive by hive, until your hands are sticky and your smudge stick has burned low. The sun is higher now, casting everything in soft gold. The bees hum louder, braver with the light. You step back, bow slightly at an old habitat and wipe your fingers on your belt. Morning chores done, hive intact, honey harvested. No stings today, not yet, anyway. You sling your basket over your shoulder, its contents sticky and warm, and make your way down the slope toward the flatter fields. The hives behind you recede into quiet again, their work just beginning as yours shifts. The buzz fades into the morning chorus of birds calling, the crunch of hooves in the distance, the low creak of a yoke being fitted to an ox. Ahead lies the stretch of land your family has worked for generations, if though farmed might be too glamorous a word. The soil here is rocky, the patches of flax and barley do their best in short growing seasons, but it's the heather that matters to you most, that spongy, resilient plant that blooms in late summer with its delicate purple flowers, drawing bees in thick, golden clouds. You pass a small grove of birches, their trunks white and papery, swaying in the morning breeze. Just beyond them, hidden to anyone not specifically looking, lies your true pride, the bee huts. Their simple structure has just 3 of them half shelters made from timber frames and thatched roofs. Inside are rows of additional scoops, tucked away from wind and predators. These aren't your home hives, they're wild lure hives, placed here among the heather in hopes of attracting wandering swarms. Swarming season is both blessing and chaos. Historians still debate the degree to which Viking Age beekeepers managed bee reproduction actively. Some evidence suggests they used splitting methods, guiding colonies into new scopes. Others propose a more passive approach, building inviting habitats, placing scopes in wildflower groves, and simply waiting. You peer inside the first hut, empty still, just dry straw and an old queen cell you left there on purpose, hoping to tempt some curious scouts. You brush a cobweb away from the entry and scatter a little ash near the base, an old trick you learned from a neighboring farmer. He claims it smells like a place bees can trust. You don't argue. The second hut is more promising. A faint scent hits your nose, sweet, resinous. You crouch. There's movement. A handful of bees zip out and hover before you. Their movements are tight, purposeful. These aren't wanderers, they're guards. You smile. A swarm must have settled recently, maybe in the past day or two. You lean closer, careful not to cast a shadow. From inside comes that low, unmistakable drone, a hive breathing as one. You won't disturb them yet, but you leave behind a bit of wax, just by the entrance, as a kind of silent offering. You whisper, without thinking, "Stay as long as you like." You straighten up and glance toward the last hut, still empty. That's alright, not every box will bloom. Beekeeping isn't a science here, it's part art, part faith, and part sheer luck. You've learned to accept all three. You settle on a nearby stump, the wood smooth and worn from years of similar pauses. The sun is higher now, brushing the tops of the trees with light. Your boots steam gently in the warming air. You remove your hood, shake out your hair, and pull a comb from your belt pouch, not for your hair, but for cleaning your hands. It's beeswax stiffened wood, carved with runes, passed down from your grandmother. You use it to scrape off stray bits of wax and comb, preserving every drop of sweetness. There's still half a slice of honeyed bread in your pouch. You take a bite. You can see the coastline from here if you squinted, just a glimpse of it between hills, a wide, steel-colored sea that sometimes gives gifts and sometimes takes them. Beyond that, nothing but stories. Other lands, other hives. The Vikings are famous for their raiding, of course, for longships and axes and shouting things that don't translate well. But there's another side, your side: quiet work, careful tending, bartering instead of pillaging, sweetness instead of salt. You pick a stalk of grass and chew on it absent-mindedly. Somewhere behind you, a bee lands on your sleeve. You freeze, letting it crawl. It investigates your tunic, pauses at the scent of wax and smoke, then buzzes away satisfied, perhaps, that you're one of the good ones. You sit there for a while longer, watching the field sway. A kestrel glides overhead. Your eyelids get heavy, just for a moment, lulled by the warmth and the stillness. But the day waits for no beekeeper. You rise, brush crumbs from your lap, and head back toward the main farmstead. Your basket swings gently at your hip, your staff taps the earth with each step. Another morning's work done, and it's not even midday. You don't get applause for it. No one sings sagas about the one who harvested bees, but the mead wouldn't flow without you, the candles wouldn't burn, the healing poultices would lose their sweetness, and deep down, the bees know, that's enough. The sun is climbing now, higher and warmer, loosening the last bits of frost from the thatched roofs and coaxing the scent of wood smoke and damp wool from the folds of your cloak. You've returned from the bee huts, your basket only half full, but your fingers sticky and your spirit oddly content. There's still the most delicate hum trailing behind your ears, the kind that settles in when you've spent time close to high vessel, like the world has a pulse, and only you are listening. You pass back through the gate of the farmstead, nodding at a boy carrying firewood who doesn't quite meet your eyes. Whether it's respect, superstition, or just early day awkwardness, you're not sure. Beekeepers have always had a slightly different place in the community, a half craftsman, half sorcerer, the ones who worked with creatures that lived between wildness and order. You duck into the small shed behind the longhousey, part storage, part sanctuary. This is where the next stage of your work begins. You'll clean the comb, separate the honey, and prepare what little wax you've taken for shaping. But first, to smoke. There's an old clay bowl you use for this part, cracked, lopsided, and blackened from years of use. You place it on a low stool and carefully pack in dried moss, a pinch of juniper, and a shred of last year's linen. You light it slowly, gently, coaxing the flame with a steady hand and patient breath. The smoke begins to curl upward and thin, twisting ribbons of blue-gray and fragrant. This isn't for the bees anymore. This is for you, because before you handle the comb, you offer smoke, to cleanse the space. Some say, to make the wax pliable, or maybe just to honor something older than explanation. You unwrap the honeycomb you harvested earlier and lay it out on a flat slate. It's golden, veined with dark pollen and shimmering with fresh honey. You take a slender bone knife and begin the work of cutting, pressing, gathering, all with a careful rhythm. This part is sticky, so very sticky. Your fingers glisten, everything glistens. The knife slides through wax like it's slicing a dream. You squeeze the pieces into a cloth pouch. Let the honey drip slowly into a clay pot beneath. It takes time. It always does. You can't rush sweetness. Historians still debate how much honey Norse communities consumed daily versus how much they exported. It was precious, no doubt, and traded often, but it was also medicine, a preservative, a sacred ingredient in rituals and offerings. You've seen warriors rub it on wounds. You've seen women mix it with herbs and whisper to their children as they healed. And then there's meta, that golden drink that slides down the throat like a sunset. But we'll get to that later. For now, it's just you, the smoke, and the hive's slow gold. A few scraps of comb are left over. dark and tough, you collect them in another pouch and these will become candles, or salves, or polish for your boots, depending on the week's needs. Nothing from the hive is wasted, not in your world. As you work, a neighbor peeks in a carry from the next farm over. She has the kind of voice that always sounds like it's about to laugh. She carries a basket and asks if you've got any wax to spare. Her family needs more candles for the coming winter. You nod, offer her a small bar, already wrapped in linen. In return, she gives you a handful of dried berries, tart and shriveled, but a welcome addition to your pouch. Bartering like this is common, especially among keepers of odd skills. You never know when you'll need a favor, or a charm, or someone to sit with your hives while you're gone. You exchange a few words of light talk, a joke about her clumsy goat, a mutual complaint about the rain last week, and then she's gone, her laughter trailing behind her like music on the wind. You stretch your arms, your back pops, a drop of honey clings to your wrist and refuses to budge. You taste it, and then you pack everything up, wax scraps, honey pot, smoking bola, and return to the longhouse, blinking as you step into the midday light. It's brighter now, crisper, the sky is vast, cloudless, the kind that feels like it's watching you. You set your honey aside to cool, covering it with a cloth to keep curious fingers, and the occasional fly, at bay. The rest of the household is moving a spinning wool, shaping wood, chasing chickens, chopping firewood with alarming enthusiasm. But you, for now, are between tasks. You glance at the comb knife, at the beeswax, and then, without quite meaning to, you smile, because you're doing exactly what you're meant to do. Working in rhythm with wings and flowers, harvesting sunlight turned sweet. And all before noon. You take a breath, long and slow, the way you do after good work. The honey is safely set aside, the wax cooling in neat shapes. The house smells of damp earth, warm wood, and that faint, unmistakable scent of bee magic, sweet, smoky, ancient. There's still more to do, though, always is. You gather your basket again, this time lighter, no combs, no tilts, just a small wrapped charm made from braided straw and a carved wooden bead, shaped like a sunwheel. It's not for trade, it's for the hive, because today is special, in the quiet way days sometimes are. You pass back through the grove, your boots pressing into moss, your breath forming little clouds that disappear before you notice. The sun's moved westward now, shadows growing longer, the world softening around the edges. The bees are still out, still busy, still humming through the heather. They don't slow down, and not for you, not for anything. You make your way to the farthest hive, the one on the edge of the forest, near the old standing stone. This one's different, older, not in design, but in feel. No matter the season, it always yields the darkest honey, not bitter, just deep, as if flavored with secrets. You kneel before it and place the charm near the base. You say nothing out loud, but your thoughts are clear. Gratitude, a small offering, maybe protection, maybe just acknowledgement. There's no one way to do it, no guidebook, you just do what feels right. Historians still argue whether Norse communities truly worshipped the gods as we understand the term, or whether their spirituality was more fluid, woven into daily acts, folded into habits, less ceremony and more rhythm. But beekeeping has always sat close to that line between the practical and the mystical. You think of Freyr, the god of fertility and prosperity. Some say he watches over bees, others credit the Dieisr, ancestral spirits who walk unseen through the woods and whisper to the hive queens. Either way, you leave your charm and step back, not wanting to overstay your welcome. Then, curiosity tugging gently at your sleeve, you lift the hive cover just a little, not to harvest, just to look. Inside, it's golden, thick honeycomb like latticed bone, bees moving with practiced, perfect choreography. No fighting, no waste, no distraction, just purpose. You watch, eyes adjusting to the dimness. One bee dances, waggling in tight loops, stopping, repeating, A message, you know. Even if you don't speak the language, a direction, a distance, a story of a flower patch not far from here, perhaps, or a warning, or a map drawn in muscle memory. You lower the lid gently, like closing the final page of a story you'll never fully understand. A breeze picks up a cool and clean and edged with piney, and you turn back toward the path. You walk slowly, no rush. The bees are watching, and you never want to seem rude. You think about who taught you this. Your grandmother, mostly. She had hands like knotted rope and eyes that saw through trees. She used to say the first beekeeper wasn't a man or woman but a child, one who followed a bee for fun and never looked back. Some scholars suggest that Norse myths connected bees with wisdom, that Odin himself learned secrets not from warriors, but from animals. There's a story, rare and rarely believed, about a hive found growing inside a skull. Inside it, honey said to grant visions. You've never seen such a thing, but on days like this, you believe it could be true. Back home, you set aside your charm pouch and take a moment to rest on the low bench near the fire pit. The longhouse is quieter now, most folk busy in the outer buildings or out on errands. You reach into a drawer and scoop a fingerful of the darkest honey. You let it melt on your tongue. It tastes like summer and soil, like memory and fire. And you remember something else your grandmother once told you: the hive knows everything you say to it. So speak kindly. Even when you're tired, you think you've done that today. You lean back, stretch your arms, and look out at the hillside. The paths worn into the earth not by feet, but by wings. There's a world within a world out there, just beyond the buzz, and somehow, you've become part of it.